Hello YouTube, my name is Koleye and I am going to be commenting on another comic drawing video. If you haven't watched some of our previous videos, please go and do that. They're really interesting. Aaron C14 has been drawing a couple of them. He's been a very, very prolific comic artist on the Polandball subreddit for over a decade. He's produced way more comics than most people. I'm not sure who holds the actual record for the number of comics produced. Back in the day, I used to make a lot of comics, but life got in the way, and I've only sort of rediscovered my passion for drawing Polandball comics in the past year or so. It's hard to find time to really sit down and draw these things, but we're really hoping that this YouTube channel is another avenue to reach people with this medium. So for this video, I think the comic that I'm drawing is a lot better than the one in the previous video that I made. I think the comic is a lot better. The joke is punchier. It's better just overall. The art is, I would say, better as well. Although one of the things that I did opt to do in this, or rather opt not to do in this video that I did in the previous one, was to not use shading. I think shading serves a purpose. If you want to make a very detailed piece of artwork, regardless of whether or not it's an actual comic, if you just want to draw a panel or something super detailed, that's totally fine. And I think shading serves a really good purpose there. But I sort of like when comics are flat, very, very two-dimensional, and shading makes a character and objects look three-dimensional, right? Because you have a light source. It's casting a shadow on these objects in 3 dimensions. So I decided to keep this comic flat. I think it just looks more cartoony, and I've experimented with different styles over the years, and I've always really liked the cartoony feel that Polandball has. So this is one of my comics that I'm just going to keep relatively flat. So this is essentially going to be a pun comic. You'll see at the very end. But these are 2 characters, both the United States. One is a campaign advisor, and the other one is a candidate for office. And really, this is sort of just a comic about polling. And this is where I'm going to digress into a little bit of politics and media literacy rather than commenting on the video itself. I think you guys know how to draw a Polandball comic, even if it's not necessarily super elegant, super detailed. It's pretty simple, right? You're just drawing lines on a blank canvas on your computer. So one of the things in American political culture, and I'm sure it's similar in many other countries as well, but in the US it's super pronounced, is the media drives stories, and certain things get picked up and blown sort of either out of proportion or deliberately used as a way to fill airtime. And one of those things is polling data, right? There are polls done for political campaigns of all kinds, whether it's for a politician that's running for office, or an advocacy group, a volunteer group, or a company trying to find out what their customers or a certain demographic thinks about some product or service that they're offering or considering offering, right? It is useful data to have. In terms of American political culture and in American media, polls drive stories, right? With the advent of the 24-hour news cycle in the United States, I think going back to the 1980s or so when CNN really sort of took off, there's been this need to fill the air all the time with any kind of news, no matter how inconsequential. Polling data is a very, very good way to fill that space, right? Because it sort of takes the pulse of the electorate in terms of political campaigns, where they are, the things that they care about, right? I'm of the opinion that polling data tells you more about trends than where people actually are. And I think a lot of pollsters and data analysts would tell you the same thing. I think particularly with the difficulty it is to get proper polling now, millennials and Gen Z don't answer their phones. I know I personally never answer my phone if there's a number that I don't recognize, if it's not already saved in my contacts, just because most of the time it's spam, right? And I don't want to answer spam. And then there's also this weird thing that, millennials and I think Zoomers have as well, which is this weird anxiety about talking with someone on the phone. I personally don't like it, but I remember growing up and talking to people on the phone. I would call my friends. This is the pre cell phone era, when everyone still had a landline. If I wanted to ask a friend to hang out, at the park or something when I'm like 10 years old, I'd have to call them. And, with the advent of texting and a lot of different messaging apps like Discord or WhatsApp or Telegram or whatever, people tend to use text a lot more. And I get it. It's more precise and it's less urgent, right? If someone calls you, if you don't pick them up, you don't know if you're going to be able to call them back again. But I've really diverged and lost the plot here. Yeah, I think polling data tells you more about trends and where people actually are at any given moment, right? There's always a margin of error. In many cases, it feels like it's, when a media outlet talks about the results of a poll, it's the poll itself that becomes the story. And it feels like the media and the people who talk to them about the poll are using it to sort of direct the conversation in a certain way. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily intentional. It's more that it's a way for them to fill time in, this crazy 24-hour news cycle that we've got going on. It's important for the people who conducted the poll, who ordered it, to get reliable data, to understand where their potential voters or customers or what have you are. It's a vital part of a democratic society to have this kind of more live pulse of the electorate. If the only thing that we really paid attention to was the vote on election day every 2 years or so, a lot of things that matter to people would get lost in between, right? Now, that being said, polls they're not plebiscites, right? They're not binding, and it's hard getting an accurate slice of society represented in a poll. So just getting back to the comic, I ended up drawing a lot of iterations of Poland here, it was pretty fun, but it was very tedious because I'm drawing a lot of them and a lot of chairs. I kept the chairs simple just because it's not really important for it to be super detailed for this punchline. Generally, I think high effort art is great, but in many ways, the level of detail that a piece of art has can take away from other aspects of that artwork. Specifically to comics, I think, at least what I look for in a comic is good storytelling, and particularly in a Polandball comic, I think the most important thing is humor. Now, Polandball is not a format or medium exclusively meant for humor, but it lends itself very easily to humor. International relations, history, political science, politics in general, these things are very heavy, big, important topics, right? In many ways, they're the most important topics because they are directly related to how humanity governs itself, right? There's nothing bigger than that in terms of what's important to humanity. So, taking the piss or bringing levity to such serious topics, I think is really great. And Polandball itself is a very silly sort of format where you have these anthropomorphized balls that represent countries, international institutions, and things like that. I think the level of detail that you put in a Polandball comic takes away from its charm. It takes away from the humor that I think is very important for the comic itself. I've always also seen comics as primarily an art form designed to convey humor, not necessarily for heavier topics, right? Things like graphic novels are great at that, but I've always viewed comics and cartoons as sort of a short form way of conveying humor to your reader, your audience. There is an elegance and simplicity, and that's really, really what I love about comics. If I had any advice to give an aspiring artist, cartoonist, a humorist, there's a couple of things, but one of them is keep it simple. The more detailed something is, the less room it gives for the main point you're trying to get across. And that's true of all artwork and most work products as well. Basically, anything in life. Spend less time on the unimportant, more time on the important. So the punchline in a comic is generally the most important thing. So having a good script, a good idea is paramount to a good comic. I guess we can go back into political culture. So, polling data is, again, super useful for a political campaign. It drives their messaging. But it's annoying because there's so many polls about everything, particularly politics, right? And at least in American media, a lot of the discussion about politics is about who's going to win this election and not the actual act of governance itself. It's always just a horse race. It's who's going to win, who's going to win, who's going to win, right? Without the sort of nuance to understand that, most Republicans share the same views as other Republicans. Most Democrats share the same views as other Democrats, right? It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of, human history whether or not Republican A becomes Speaker of the House or Republican B becomes Speaker of the House. On most issues, they're relatively similar. So this obsession with who's going to win, it sort of falls into this paradigm that I think is very similar to reality TV. It's really taking politics as entertainment. And I think that does a disservice to democracy and to government in general and politics. It makes politics a little bit more shallow, and it focuses on the who rather than the what. And while the who is important, in many cases it's one of the defining features of an election or a poll, people don't persist across different eras. Ideas do. The idea of democracy is something like 3,000 years old. That's something that will persist as long as humanity persists, the idea at the very least. So my personal opinion is that polling data, while it is useful, in many ways can lead us astray from the things that make democratic governance and institutions so widely cherished in the countries and societies that do have them, or in those societies and people who aspire to have them. So I'm getting to the end of the comic, and I'll leave it up on the screen for you guys to take a look at the finished product. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. We really appreciate being able to bring a diverse set of Polandball videos and content to all of you. Please let us know in the comments what sort of content you've enjoyed that we've put out so far and what kind of content you would like to see. I think these comic drawings are going to be a fairly common staple of the content that we put up on this channel. I think, like this video, they'll focus a little bit less on how we're drawing and more on commentary, whether it's humorous or informative in nature. But please let us know what you've liked about our content thus far. Thank you.